With the TurboDuo, you can play standard turbo chip and 1 megabit CDs as well as super CD games.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate TurboDuo review here on Player One Start. In the previous parts in this series, we took a look at the console tech specs, the early games and its launch, and now we're going to start taking a look at the games that were released in the final year of its life cycle. It was the console that died way too soon, or the console that arrived too late. I guess we'll have to talk about that in its legacy. But for now, let's go ahead and take a look at what games were offered in 1993.
Where we last left off, we were taking a look at the early titles that were released on the TurboDuo or Super CD-ROM 2 format. Keeping in mind that this system launched in October of 1992, this is actually a decent amount of titles to release, especially compared to the early releases on the TurboGrafx 16. However, in 1993, the final year this console would see any releases, there were not that many games released, especially compared to their competitors. Again, a lot of this came down to lack of third-party support, as again, most of these games would be ported over by TTI themselves. But as the TurboGrafx 16 showed, quantity did not matter as much as quality, and there were a lot of quality titles available for that console. So part of the goal of this video is to see if there are many quality titles among the few that were released. One thing to keep in mind as we look through these titles is that a lot of home computers at the time the system released did not have a CD-ROM drive. In fact, that was still a luxury item. And I think that reflects in the titles they ported over, as some of these games, such as Loom and Prince of Persia, would have been much more expensive to have on a high-end PC. So while having a TurboDuo back in the day was a significant investment, it may have been worth it if you wanted some of these games. And nowadays, if you're going to play on real hardware, I think it's actually easier to get the TurboDuo up and working than it would to get an old MS-DOS PC and boot up some of these titles. Although I understand that playing this on real hardware with either option is going to be a significant investment. In the end, what it comes down to is how do these games play?
So far, I have enjoyed almost every single game released on the Super CD-ROM format. Is this trend going to continue, though? There's only one way to find out. Let's go ahead and play through some of these games.
Bonk 3 on CD is exactly the same as Bonk on the cartridge in terms of gameplay and graphics, it seems like. So if you want to know more about that, I would go back and watch my Ultimate TurboGrafx 16 review. I believe it's part 5 where I talk about action games, where I go over what Bonk 3 is like. In fact, even a game review at the time, in GamePro magazine, stated that it offers too little content to be worthwhile to gamers who had already purchased the cartridge version. The only difference I could see in this game was the CD quality soundtrack, and unfortunately that was not enough to get me into this game. And considering the price that you have to pay to get this on CD versus cartridge, it would be much easier just to get this game on cartridge, even though that is also a high price you have to pay. Overall, I would say I was looking for much more out of this version than they delivered on. It literally just feels like they copied and pasted the soundtrack over it, and I was not impressed at all.
Legend speaks of a dark horde rising to reclaim the lands they once ruled before the time of man. It is also said that the chosen will come forth to strike them down, wielding a shining light to lift this darkness from the face of the world.
Now, Dungeon Explorer 2, on the other hand, is a different story. This is an action role-playing video game that was developed and published by Hudson Soft, releasing in Japan in March of 1993, making its way over to the US on the TurboDuo by TTI on October of that same year. Just like its predecessor, it is an action role-playing game with dungeon crawling and hack-and-slash elements that is played in a top-down perspective. Players assume the role of one of the 8 main characters, tasked with recovering the Aura Stone from Thades, an evil magician who stole it from the king. Each character belongs to a specific class, and they have different varying abilities. This game was met with mostly positive critical reception, as well as praise from gamers directed towards the game's graphics, audio, gameplay, and multiplayer. As compared to the original, I would say if you like that one, you will definitely like the sequel as well. Although if I were to offer a tip on collecting this title, I would definitely go for the PC Engine CD version, as I didn't find the language barrier to be as much of an issue with this game, as it's more action-oriented. Of course, there were a couple things that showed up in Japanese that I had to know how to click through, but it wasn't too bad if I used a strategy guide. This is a type of RPG game where I really like the gameplay style more than I care about the actual story, so the only thing I can be critical of this game is that the story does not really get me too interested in it. It's kind of a generic story, but the gameplay itself became so addictive that I just couldn't put it down. It definitely appealed to me personally. So I'd recommend this mainly to those that like these kind of RPGs, but I would maybe recommend the first Dungeon Explorer if you don't know if you're going to like this game or not. Cotton Fantastic Night Dreams is a scrolling shooter video game developed by Success and originally released in Japanese arcades in 1991, eventually being ported to the PC Engine, making its way over to the US on the TurboDuo. This game is actually the first installment in the Cotton series, where players assume the role of a young witch, Cotton, who, alongside fairy companion Silk, sets out on her broomstick on a quest to defeat several monsters and get her Willow Candy. The gameplay consists of mainly shooting, mixed with some role-playing elements, using the 2-button configuration. Obvious compromises had to be made from the arcade version to get it to run on the TurboDuo, but I think it does a pretty decent job, with a lower screen resolution, modified color palette, and maintaining CD quality audio. Upon its release, this game did receive positive reception from critics, while gamers noted it had arcade-accurate graphics, animations, a hard rock soundtrack, and playability with replay value, they criticized the presentation. And I think that all comes down to the fact that this game is more of a cute-em-up, which is not a genre that was as well received in the past as it is today. The only thing I will say is that for a cute-em-up, the difficulty level here is actually cranked up a little bit, as I did find this game more challenging than others in this genre. That is not to this game's detriment, as it did make me want to keep coming back, challenging me to beat each level, but I will admit this is one I have not beaten yet. Overall, I think those that are fans of shoot-em-up games will find this game interesting. However, for casual fans, they may want to choose a different one to start with. I do find it hard to recommend almost any games released in the later part of the TurboDuo's life cycle due to the price. And this game is no exception, it's definitely up there on the list. So unless you're a hardcore fan that has to play it on original hardware, you can definitely emulate this and get your money's worth out of it.
The freezing winter had passed. The warm spring brought with it the gentle sunlight shining through the trees. The earth below was covered with the green of new life. That night, the powerful sorcerer, Great Grey Lord, descended from the sky and appeared in the village. To win acceptance as a true man, Theron accepted the challenge of the quest. He must regain the 7 great treasures stolen from the monastery in the lost city of Yabrodin, and must restore the monastery to its past glory. Theron's quest has now begun.
Dungeon Master: Theron's Quest is a modified version of the game Dungeon Master that was released on HuCard for the TurboGrafx. The main goal of this game is Theron finding 7 parts of the Blue Knight's armor, each of which is located within one of the 7 mini-dungeons. Dungeons are explored in a first-person perspective just as in the original game, however there are some differences. The game itself has a different story, but can be considered kind of like a light version of Dungeon Master. It doesn't contain all of the items, spells, and monsters featured in the original, and the game is split up across 7 smaller dungeons instead of one great big dungeon. Just like the original game, you can team up with up to 4 champions, fighting through dungeons, gaining experience, and finding items. After successfully completing each dungeon, the whole party loses its collected items, and the other 3 champions you play as lose their skills and stats. Your game can only be saved between dungeons, but the lack of the original save option during that level has been replaced by many resurrection altars. As a result of fewer enemies in the game, I feel the game is a bit easier than the original. Reviewers since this game's release has stated that the graphics of this game have not lived up, as first-party dungeon crawlers from this time period do not look well today, at least I don't think they've aged well. Some still cite this as a solid RPG, but others have stated that if you're not a fan of dungeon crawlers, then this game is definitely not going to be for you. I've seen reviews of this game go around 6 or 7 out of 10, and my personal opinion would be on the lower end of that, possibly even a 5 out of 10. A neat game, but I would not consider it a necessity unless you're going for a complete collection. The Dynastic Hero was ported over to the TurboDuo by Hudson Soft, and... well, this game doesn't look familiar. Yeah, this game is definitely, Wonder Boy in Monster World. This is again one of the strange incidences where Hudson Soft has taken this franchise and tried to make it into a completely different game, or at least rebranded it, as this is the same thing they did with the Adventure Island series as well. But anyway, this game does follow the same gameplay elements and plot outline of Wonder Boy in Monster World, except for the names of the characters have all been changed. I will say, as a fan of the original game, I am a fan of this game as well. The problem is, again, as with all titles on the TurboDuo, this one is just way too expensive to collect, so I would definitely recommend this on a system where this title is cheaper. Again, with the main difference from any cartridge version being that this has a CD quality soundtrack to go with it. So in terms of collecting it for your physical console, I would say you can skip this one. Again, unless you're a hardcore collector and you really feel like you have to have a good platforming action game to go with your TurboDuo. As again, I do feel like they did a good job porting this game to the system, and I really did enjoy my time with this game. Exile Wicked Phenomenon is the final game in the Exile series, and again it was released in North America on July 31st, 1993, once again published by Working Designs. And while I enjoyed the first game actually quite a lot, the second game in this series, I guess, left me a little disappointed. Again, the story is not really the main point why I would play this game, but it is something that I did find disappointing, as it's not really as involved as the first game. The reasons you visit each location in the game are just very flimsy or non-existent. I have the feeling there was a lot lost in translation. In this game, your traveling companions are also playable, however, that's about all I can say for it. I didn't really enjoy playing as any of the characters in this game. They all have varying stats, but they all prove to be almost equally useless in battle. For example, your strongest character has no range with their weapon. Your weakest character has good range, but it's not worth it because you can't really do any damage. I feel this makes the game a bit more tedious and frustrating than it really needs to be. There is one character who I did enjoy playing as, and that was Lawrence. The axe had a lot of range, and often got multiple hits in one swing, better than your main character, but you only have him for a brief amount of time. And the reason why I care so much about the battle stats of these characters is the fact that I feel like this is one of the most difficult games of all time. The enemy's strength is jacked up to such a ludicrous degree that you can only survive 1 or 2 hits before death. And reading from other reviews, this is something that gets progressively worse throughout the game, not better. I guarantee you will spend more time pacing back and forth in each area trying to level up your character to be able to make any more progress in the game, that you're just going to get bored and give up before you keep going. I've seen other reviews rank this at around a 7 out of 10, but I would say that's a bit too high. I would give this a 5 or a 6 out of 10 at best. So sadly it is not one I can recommend to anyone for their TurboDuo. Godzilla Battle Legends, simply referred to as Godzilla in North America, is a fighting game based on the Godzilla film franchise. It was developed by Alpha System and published in the United States, again by Hudson Soft. Now you would think this would be a game that was developed in Japan and then ported over to the US, but actually, from my research, it looks like it was the exact opposite. And I am almost positive this game was released due to the fact that fighting games were becoming all of the rage in 1993, with Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter battling it out for quarters in the arcades and starting to make home ports. Sadly, this game does not live up to that kind of hype. The game does feature Godzilla, which is the only monster playable in the single-player mode. However, there's also a monster of rosters that you can play against if you have 2 players. In the single-player mode, similar to Mortal Kombat, you make your way through the other monsters, which includes other monsters that Godzilla fights in the film franchise. But in terms of how the game plays, I would say it borrows heavily from Street Fighter II, but the action is much slower. I was actually never able to successfully pull off a special attack, but the simple moves I pulled off with no problem. Mostly what it comes down to for me is this is an inferior, mediocre fighting game. And that's coming from someone who is in love with the Godzilla franchise. I actually found it great that this kind of game exists, but it would definitely be only worth it to play it against another player. So again, I think that fans of Godzilla will be the only ones that like this game, but due to lack of options, this could be the only fighter that you enjoy on this system. And lastly for today, we're going to take a look at John Madden Duo CD Football. And for those of you that have watched the channel for a while, you'll know I'm not the biggest fan of vintage sports games unless it's something that's nostalgic to me personally. And for me, the first Madden game I ever remember playing was Madden 2000 for the PlayStation 1. So even though it had been around for a while, I was playing the Sega sports football games instead. Coming back as an adult to play these games, I actually find them to be almost on par, if not a little bit better, than the Sega Sports franchise that I grew up with. But on the TurboGrafx CD, I actually find myself having a lot of fun with this title. Compared to other John Madden football games that would have been out during this time, probably 92, 93, it plays just as good as those games, with the added benefit of having CD quality audio for the game player banter back and forth, as well as announcing and video clips. Overall, I really feel like this game was ported over very well, and I think that those that have played these games back in the day, especially Madden 93, you would definitely want to come back and play this version, as it offers things that no other John Madden game would have offered at the time, as this is the only one of the 16-bit generation that ended up on CD. A true hidden gem on an underappreciated platform. So yes, it can happen, a positive sports game review from me on this channel. It's happening now, it happened before, and it will happen again. Seriously though, I think this will definitely appeal to those of you that are football fans today, especially because this offers a more historic perspective, but I think the main audience of people who want to collect this game are fans of sports games from the past. Where there we have 8 games that were released in 1993, and we only have 8 more to go. What you see on the screen right now is every game that was released specifically taking advantage of the Super CD-ROM 2 format on the TurboDuo. There's only about a total of 25 games that were released for the TurboDuo specifically, and although that number is bigger than the number of games released for the TurboGrafx CD by itself, it's such a small game library that we should be able to cover all of these games. This number looks even more ludicrously small when you look at the total number of games released for the PC Engine and the PC Engine Duo in Japan. And even though this system is region-free, I am only focusing on the games released in North America, at least for this part of the review. So far, we've seen a mixture of games that really aren't worth collecting, mainly because of the high price due to the rarity of these items. And sadly, some of my favorite experiences out of these games are also available on HuCard for a lot cheaper, so again it makes it hard for me to recommend these for the casual collector. But will the last 8 games that I haven't covered yet offer anything of value? Well, that'll be something we'll have to take a look at in the next and last video in the TurboDuo series.
Alright, so far I have reviewed almost every single game for the Super CD-ROM 2 format that was released for the TurboDuo, TurboGrafx CD, etc. And again, this video is running a little long, so as with last time, I'm going to split off the rest of these games into the next video. So stay tuned for that coming out to you real soon. Remember, if you like what you see, please remember to click on that like button. Also leave a comment below, let me know what you liked about today's video, let me know what you guys think about these games that I've showcased. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.